He begged for just one meal, but what happened next didn't just change his life, it awakened humanity in an entire town that had forgotten how to feel. The cold wind howled through the empty streets of a quiet American town as an old man named Walter slowly walked under a flickering streetlight, his fragile body wrapped in a torn coat that could no longer protect him from the freezing night, his hands trembling not only from the cold, but from a hunger that had been growing inside him for days. And yet deeper than his hunger was a pain far worse, the feeling of being invisible in a world that once knew his name. He stopped outside a brightly lit restaurant, staring through the glass window at families laughing, children smiling, couples sharing meals, and for a brief moment his eyes filled with memories of a life he once had, a life where he sat at tables like those with his wife Margaret, where laughter filled his home and hope filled his heart. But everything had changed the night a terrible accident took her away from him, leaving behind a silence so heavy that it slowly destroyed everything he had built. The hospital bills drained his savings, grief consumed his strength, he lost his job, then his house, and one by one even the people he once called friends disappeared, until he was left alone with nothing but memories and regret. A sudden gust of wind pulled him back to reality as his stomach growled painfully, and gathering what little courage he had left, Walter pushed open the restaurant door, stepping into warmth that felt almost unreal. But the warmth quickly faded as conversation slowed, eyes turned, whispers spread, and he could feel the judgment in every glance as he quietly walked to an empty table and sat down, trying to make himself invisible. But a waitress soon approached, her polite smile fading as she looked at him and said firmly that he needed to order something or leave. And with a trembling voice and broken pride, Walter whispered that he had no money and hadn't eaten in 2 days, asking if he could just have a small piece of bread. But his words were met with silence, followed by quiet mockery as a man nearby muttered that people like him always wanted something for free, and a woman whispered that he was ruining the atmosphere. And those words cut deeper than any hunger ever could, as Walter lowered his head in shame, slowly pushing his chair back and apologizing softly before preparing to leave, believing once again that he didn't belong anywhere. But just as he turned, a soft yet powerful voice said stop, and the entire room fell silent as a young woman named Emily stood up from her table, having witnessed everything, unable to ignore the pain in Walter's eyes. And without hesitation, she walked toward him, pulled out a chair, sat beside him, and gently told him he wasn't going anywhere, before turning to the waitress and calmly asking for the biggest meal on the menu and making it 2. And in that moment, the room shifted, curiosity replacing judgment, as Walter looked at her in disbelief, asking why she would do this for him. And with a gentle smile filled with quiet understanding, Emily replied that she knew what it felt like to have nothing, because once she had been in his place and someone had helped her. And now it was her turn to pass that kindness forward. And those words broke something inside Walter, as tears filled his eyes. Tears not just of sadness, but of relief, of being seen again after so long. And when the food arrived, his hands trembled as he took the first bite, overwhelmed not just by the taste, but by the warmth of compassion he had almost forgotten existed. And as they ate, Walter slowly began to share his story, speaking of his wife, his loss, his struggles, his loneliness, and Emily listened without interrupting, without judging, simply offering him the dignity of being heard. And around them, the same people who had once looked at him with disdain now sat in silence, some lowering their heads in shame, others wiping away quiet tears, as the reality of their own indifference settled in. And by the end of that meal, Walter was no longer invisible. He was no longer just a homeless man. He was a human being again, someone with a story, someone who mattered.
But what happened next went far beyond that single night, because the following day Emily returned to the restaurant and spoke to the owner, sharing Walter's story not as a tale of pity, but as a reminder of humanity. And her words sparked something powerful, as the restaurant soon started a simple initiative, allowing people to pay for extra meals for those in need. And what began as a small act of kindness quickly grew into something much bigger, as more people joined, volunteers stepped forward, and the entire town slowly transformed into a community that cared. And Walter himself found a new beginning as he was offered a small job at the restaurant, starting with cleaning tables, but eventually greeting customers with a warm smile. The same man who once stood outside in the cold now stood inside with dignity and purpose. And over time, his life rebuilt piece by piece, not because of money or luck, but because someone chose to care. And years later, people would still remember that cold night, not because a hungry man asked for food, but because one act of kindness reminded everyone that even in a world that often feels cold and indifferent, humanity is never truly lost. It only takes one person to bring it back to life.